So I guess the first thing is to address why I'm doing this. I love training, and when I train, I love to watch videos on YouTube of other people training. I figured this would not only be a good way for me to sort of document my own training, both for myself and for anybody else who actually wants to watch it. But hopefully, I can address some training techniques and um, get people interested in the type of training I do. Um, the type of training I'm really into powerlifting, strength training, and bodybuilding. I am also, I wouldn't call myself a hybrid athlete, but I definitely like a hybrid approach. I love to run, mostly because it's hard, but it's something that I got into when I lived out in Colorado. So maybe we'll get into that a little bit. Um, but for the most part, I just wanted to, you know, get started. I guess that's the first step of trying to get into this whole YouTube training thing. So um, I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to have been able to build my own home gym. So this is actually my basement that you can see. And what I'm using right here is actually a lat pull down machine that's got a seated row ability on it that I've kind of rigged up to be able to do some lying leg curls. I really wanted to get a leg curl machine, but they're sort of expensive. And from what I understand, the home options are not that awesome. Um, the way that most plate loaded leg curl machines work causes the leg pads to drift a little bit. So you have, one leg on the outside of the machine tracking a little bit differently than the inside leg. And for the money, trying to spend anywhere from 500 to $1,000, it just really wasn't worth it to me. So I had to figure out some ways to make this work. And to be totally honest, this works pretty well. And I'm glad I figured it out because hamstring training is not one of my strong suits. It's something that I've sort of neglected. It's kind of hard, especially training at home. You have limited options other than doing like RDLs and maybe some stiff leg deadlifts and stuff like that. So this really puts a different uh, stimulus into my training, and it's something I've been working on quite a bit recently, trying to improve. Pretty cool option. As you can see with this training, I'm doing something called a rest pause technique. That's a kind of an advanced training intensity protocol where you train close to failure, take a quick break, train again close to failure, take a break, and then do it one more time. It's just an intensity technique, trying to get some extra volume, give myself a little bit of a break in between, uh, pushing each set close to failure and just getting a little bit extra volume. It's kind of a cool way to, you know, train if you're on a time budget or if you just have some energy to burn and want to, take your training a little bit of a step further. Now we're getting into some back squat. Um, I almost always start with the bar just because I've had a lot of injuries in the past, both from lifting and from work. I've been working in a pretty labor intensive position for quite a long time now, so I have some issues like sciatica that flare up every once in a while. Um, and just from walking so much and getting a little bit older, my knees don't feel that great. So I take my warm ups, especially with squatting and legs, pretty seriously just because it takes me a while to get to a place where I feel good enough to be able to push some weight. Now you'll see as I'm training here, I do not work up to very heavy weight, and that's mostly because, like I said, I've dealt with a lot of injuries and I'm sort of getting back into consistent leg training. Um, I've definitely improved quite a bit over the past couple months, but that's only because of consistency. Being able to train often and, you know, stay consistent with leg training, which is, you know, easier said than done. Um, but by doing that, I've kind of gotten into a groove and I've gotten to a place where my technique feels good. And then after a couple of sets, I can really get into a good rhythm and, you know, get a good mind muscle connection between my legs and my brain so that I can produce force efficiently. You also notice I've got this wedge that I built under my feet. That's just because I had poor ankle mobility. And this using that kind of allows my knees to track over my toes a little bit and help me get into a more erect position. I'm very used to low bar squatting. I've always low bar squatted. It's kind of something that I just sort of gravitated towards, probably because of my bigger build. But this wedge under my feet helps me get into a really good position and helps, target the quads, but also allows me to move through the squat movement efficiently and effectively. You also notice I'm using what's known as a buffalo bar. Um, Chris Duffin actually was one of the first people that I've ever seen use something like this. He's got his own Duffalo bar through Kabuki Strength. Um, but this rounded type of bar, uh, yeah, it does place the weight a little bit lower on your center of mass. But I like it because of the way that it bends around my back. Kind of helps me get into a comfortable position, allows me to, sit into the squat and not have to really focus on working my elbows to get tight. That's why I go with a little bit wider of a grip, just because it's more comfortable. I know it could potentially, cause me to not be as strong as I possibly could be, but it's what works for me right now. Just for a weight belt, I just recently got this one. I've been using a really thick powerlifting belt for most of my lifting career. Um, but I'm getting a little bit bigger and I wanted something that was a bit more comfortable. The powerlifting belt is super rigid, and this belt by Grim Reaper's actually pretty affordable, um, but it's very very comfortable and sort of distributes the pressure that it puts on my torso pretty evenly. Um, I'm not a huge user of a belt, but I think it's pretty valuable. It allows me to really um, it improves my Valsalva maneuver where I, hold my breath and really push my rib cage out against that belt and, lock in my obliques and lower back. It helps me get tight and that helps keep me safe. But it also helps me distribute force through my legs um, and into the bar. So I like to, warm up as much as I can without a belt just to help develop my core and learn how to brace properly, um, and just get better and better at it. I'm getting to a point where now I'm using the weight belt later and later in my leg workouts, which is a good sign that my ability to brace and stay tight throughout the movement is definitely improving. Especially with how I squat, I go deep. Um, I've always gone as deep as I can. That's just actually what's most comfortable for me and allows me to connect with my legs a little bit better than if I were to stop it slightly higher. Um, you know, People will argue back and forth of whether or not going to 90 is good enough, whether you should go deeper. I'm a full ROM advocate, full range of motion. But I also think that it's actually easier for me to produce force and get out of the hole if I go all the way down. So that was a top set with the bar is actually 50 pounds, so 230 on that one. Like I said, trying to improve. And then finally I move into some RDLs. This was one of a couple of sets that I did. I was actually not feeling great by the end of this workout, but I like doing these, especially because I want to try and hit my hamstrings. As you could tell, this workout, while I did sort of focus on uh, back squat, I wanted to prioritize my hamstring training a little bit more because I typically hammer quads pretty hard. Something that's easy to do when you have, no machines and you're training with free weights. I'm, you know, constantly doing squats, and the way that I squat is primarily quad heavy. So finishing up with some RDLs, a nice burn. Um, Trying to really focus on the stretch here and grow those hamstrings and glutes as much as I can.